Today we want to create a special animation using the Update Transition API from Jetpack Compose. We are going to implement an animation similar to Instagram's like animation when you tap on a post and you see a heart that is animated and it appears for a few seconds and then it disappears. So we are going to implement that in Android Studio. Let's get started by creating a new project. Empty compose activity. Let's call it heart animation and save it in our course directory. Everything is okay. Press finish and wait for the project to be created. Alright, the project is created. I minimized the project explorer from the left and remove the default composables added by Android Studio. Let's remove the content inside our theme as well. And let's create a composable that will contain our animation. I'm gonna call it heart animation demo. Let's also make it a preview. The first thing I'm gonna do in order to have several different states for the heart is to create these states, and we need to know which states do we have. Note that in order for the heart to be animated using the Transition API in Jetpack Compose, we have three states. The first state is the initial state, and then we have the liked state, and we have the gone state or disappeared when the heart is disappeared. So we have three states. I create an enum class to identify that, enum class, and I name it like because these are basically three states of liking a post. So I name it like, and then the first item is initial, when the heart starts to animate, and then we have liked, and finally gone, when the heart is gone. So let's create a state for the heart, val like state. I call it by. Remember, I use a mutable transition state to specify the first state that I'm going to pass to the Transition API. So mutable state of mutable transition state, and then for the mutable transition state I'm gonna pass the gone state, because the heart is not supposed to be animated at first. It's going to be animated only when the user taps the post 2 times or double taps it. So I pass it like dot gone. Let's also import get value and set value. Because this is val, it doesn't require set val, but if it was var, we had to import that as well. So now let's initialize our transition. Let's create a transition object. Val transition, I name the object transition, and equal update transition, import update transition. And as you can see, update transition can be called in two ways. One of them takes target state that we have used in another video, and the other takes a mutable transition state, which can use the variable that we have created here. Its type is mutable transition state. So I pass it like state. It does have a label as well. So like transition, I name it. And the first parameter's name is transition state. Also, because we will mutate the value of like state later on when the user clicks it, when the user double taps the image or post, I'm gonna make this var and import set value. Okay, for the heart to be animated, we will have two different transitions. One transition for the alpha of the heart, because the heart is going to be animated in a way that it increases its alpha value. Its alpha value starts from 0 and then it becomes fully visible and then it disappears. So we need to animate alpha. I create a transition for alpha and alpha transition, I name it by transition dot up animate float. I'm animating float because alpha is the float value, has a float value, and let's call it heart alpha, in fact, and then specify different parameters of this transition. It has transition spec, which you can see it's a lambda I will fill it later. Then we have label heart alpha or simply alpha, and then we have target value by state, which is basically the target values that we have based on the state. So first let's specify the transition spec. We need to decide here which animations to use based on different states of our animation. So I use a when statement here, and I say when we are transitioning from like.initial to is transitioning to like.liked. If we are transitioning between these two states, then we can use a keyframes animation where we have detailed control on how to change different values on different times of the animation. So here I specify duration of the animation, duration millis. I use 500 milliseconds, and then different values for different timestamps of this animation. So for example, 0f at 0, and then 300 at 300f at 300, sorry, this is the value of alpha, so it cannot be more than 1. 0.5 at 300, and 0.5 at 255, and 1f at 400. Okay, this is our keyframes animation. And now about other states. If we are transitioning from like.liked to is transitioning to like.gone, if the heart is disappearing, then we use a simple tween animation. We say please hide it in 300 milliseconds, for example. And in other cases, else, if we are transitioning between other states, which basically means, for example, if we are transitioning from gone to initial, then use a simple snap. And snap doesn't do any special transition, any special animation. It just switches the values from one value to the other and doesn't animate between them. Okay, now let's specify the target values of the animation. The target values based on a state, when the state is like.liked, then the target value will be 1f, because the heart has to be fully animated, and otherwise it needs to be invisible. If it is liked, then it needs to be fully visible, and otherwise it needs to be invisible. And all our transitions will happen when we are transitioning between these two values. Okay, now let's create our other transition, which is for scale, because when we like and double tap a post, we also want to animate its scale. The heart is animated in a way that it increases its scale, it becomes bigger, it expands, and then it starts to shrink again, something like a heart pulse. So val heart scale, I name it by transition.animate float again, because scale is a float value. Transition spec, label heart scale, or simply scale, and then target values. So for the scale to work, again we consider which states we are transitioning between. So when we are transitioning from like that initial to like that liked, then we use a simple spring animation because we want to show the heart as animated and as live as possible when it expands. So I use a spring animation with a damping ratio that is considerably big. Damping ratio medium spring dot medium stiffness medium. Sorry, spring damping ratio medium bouncy. If we are transitioning from liked to gone, then again we can use a simple tween animation. So like dot gone, like dot liked is transitioning to like that gone. We use a simple tween animation with a duration of 350 milliseconds, for example. Or in order to be consistent with the other animation, let's use 300. And otherwise, use a simple snap to, for example, transition from like that liked from like that gone to like that initial. We just need to swap values without any special effect or animation. And finally, specify the target values of a scale. The scale can be either 0 or 4 or 5, or which scale that you want, whichever scale that you want for your heart. So I say when my state is like that liked, then use a scale of 3F, for example. Otherwise use 0F. When it is liked, we multiply the scale of the size of our heart by 3. When it is initial, it is 0. When it is gone, it is 0 again. Okay, now we have two child transitions from our transition, heart scale and heart alpha, and we can use them for our heart. Let's create a heart inside a box. We can use a box, but you are free to use any other container that you like. Box modifier, I use a modifier to give it size. Fill max size, I increase its size to the most available space, maximum available space, and yeah, that's good. I am also going to give it a pointer input modifier so that I can detect double tap. Pointer input, import pointer input like this. And if you look at the different overrides of pointer input, you can see that one of them takes keys. So I pass in unit for the key. I don't have a special key here, but instead I detect gestures in the body of its scope. So I say detect tap gestures. I select the second override of detect tap gestures. One of the parameters you can see is on double tap. So I say on double tap when the post is double tapped, then we need to initiate the animation by switching the like state to mutable transition state with the initial state of liked, initial like dot initial. But how does make the animation work and start working? We need to actually tell the system to do this, and we do that by adding an if statement here inside the body of the box, and we tell it to do the animation in sequence. So we check the current state of the animation, and then we specify the target state of the animation based on that. So I say if like state dot current state is initial, then target state, then its target state will be liked. We tell the animation system, the transition system, what the target state is, so that it can animate from the previous state, from the current state to that target state. And based on the transition specifications that we have created for both child transitions, it knows how to perform the transition between those states. So like the target state is equal to like that liked, else if like state that current state is equal to like that gone, if it is equal to like that liked, then the target state will be gone. Like that gone. Yes, just these two. If it is initial, then it will be animated. It will go to liked, and if it is liked, its next state, its target state, will be gone. It will disappear from the screen. What if it is gone? If it is gone, we don't do anything, because we don't want to animate the heart automatically and repeatedly. We just want to initiate its animation when the user double taps the screen, and that happens with this, actually, with on double tap that we specified here. And for that, you can see that we specified the initial state as initial, and then it knows where to go from the initial state of like that initial. It will go to liked. Okay, now let's add our heart. I do that using an image. I import image. Let's add Actually, I add an image as the image of the post, and then we will add our heart. So image and painter resource to load the image. I need to add an image to my resources. I have it in my pictures directory. Let's add it. I copy this image, for example, back to Android Studio, add it to my resources drawable directory, paste it here. Let's call it apples. r.drawable.apples. The resource and content description. For content description, I type apples, for example. With a content scale of crop, and also let's fill in the whole available space. Modifier dot fill max size. All right, let's also give it some padding. Depth. Actually, let's remove the padding. It's not necessary here. And after the image, I add my heart icon. So I use icon, and for the icon I use icons field.favorite. This is the heart icon available in material icons package. Import icons and favorite. And for the content description, import I type heart. All right, let's use a tint. Let's specify its color. I want my heart to be white, so color.white. I want to fill it with white color. Import color, and after tint, let's give it a modifier so that I can give it a size other than the default size, which is a small icon. So modifier that size, the size of 100 depth, for example. Import size and import depth. Also, because we are inside a box, let's use a center alignment. Alignment.center, so that the heart appears in the center of our post, in the center of our image, on top of the image, in fact. But its alignment will be centered. Okay, now we have our box that will detect the double tap from the user, and it contains the image as the image of the post, and we have the heart that will disappear and that will appear when that event happens, and that appearance and disappearance will be done using a transition in an animated way. So let's now add and apply the transitions to our heart. I do that on the graphics layer because the two properties that we use are modifiable inside graphics layer. So the alpha, for the alpha I specify and I give heart alpha. This is the child transition used for animating alpha. And also scale X, because we don't have a property of a scale, but we have a scale X and scale Y. So for scale X I use heart scale, and for scale Y I use heart scale. Alright, now we applied our animated properties to alpha and scale in our graphics layer for the icon, and we are ready to run and see the result. Let's minimize the left part, switch to split view and refresh our preview. Build and refresh. We wait for the build to complete and preview to appear. Alright, our preview appeared. Let's switch to zoom to fit screen and also enable interactive mode so that we can test our animation by double tapping the screen. Let's double tap, and if everything goes well, we will see the heart in an animated way. It appears and then disappears. There we go. We see the heart that appears in an animated way. Both the alpha of the heart and the scale of it is animated. It starts from the initial state, goes to light, and then goes to the gone state. So that's it for how it works, and we saw a practical example of using transition state, using the transition API with mutable transition state to create a nice and practical animation for our application. Let's also use it inside our set content so that we can run the application with. So heart animation demo, and run it on the emulator. Alright, the application is launched. Let's test our transition on the device by double tapping the screen. There we go. It works as expected. So that's it for an example of using the transition API. We created our different states using an enum class, and we created an initial state of the type mutable transition state, and we created a transition object using update transition that took the transition state that we had created, and we created child transitions for it that included the alpha and scale of the heart that we meant to create, and then we used these animated properties, that is scale and alpha on the heart inside the box, and we modified its properties, the heart's properties that needed to be animated in the graphics layer. Those properties included the alpha and scale X and scale Y. So I hope that you liked this video on how to use transition API to create a nice and practical animation.